Previously in Uncommon, Book 1 in the Chronicles of the Common series, LUHCEAN, Kai, Izzy, Eva, and her hellhound were all taken into custody by the King of Atlana. And now, Chapter 12, LUHCEAN. I was furious. I'd been pacing the length of the containment shield for the past hour and still could barely control my need to beat Kai into the ground. 2 days. It had taken Kai a total of 2 days to break his promise to me and our crew. He placed his own vengeance before the good of our people, before family. Now we were sitting in the King of Atlana's prison with our weapons confiscated and Eva nowhere to be seen. I didn't know if I was more furious over Kai's actions or losing the woman from the White Room just after discovering she was real. I was still in awe that she existed, that she wasn't just a figment of my imagination. Once Ileana discovered Eva's identity, she was going to be a ruthless romantic. There was only one problem. I was starting to come to the conclusion that Eva and Kai were somehow connected. It was far too coincidental Eva arrived in the common the day that Kai awoke from his magical sleep. I clenched my jaw and paused in front of the containment shield. The guards chatted and joked as if nothing of importance were happening in the universe, while my entire world was tumbling and shifting into a terrible new order I couldn't yet decipher. The sight of Eva risking her life to save Kai, then lying on top of him, was like a death blow. To salt the wound, she appeared fascinated by Kai. My brother's appeal was a fact I had grown accustomed to long ago. That didn't mean I wasn't annoyed when it came to this one woman. I wanted to kick myself for not taking the advice from everyone to cut my blasted hair before this mission. Not that it would have made a difference if the two were fated mates. A thought that made me nauseous. Still, I was intrigued to see if she remembered the White Room, and me, as I did her. Gods, I was like a pathetic cub, lovesick over the new girl at school. Now was not the time to fall for an unknown and unattainable woman. I needed to keep my crew alive and get us out of this prison unharmed. I needed to plan our mission and find a new home for the Hada. The little witch who claimed to be Kai's former Vatas clone was another mystery. Her story implied she escaped the Vatas to save the Hada. Frustratingly, she refused to divulge her preposterous plans to achieve such a feat until the time was right. The woman was odd, to say the least, which gave me little hope for the veracity of her intentions. But if she truly were a Vatas clone, there was no doubt she possessed a vast range of knowledge that could be helpful, assuming said knowledge wasn't corrupted during her cloning. But was the wealth of wisdom worth the risk? Synergis wanted the women, the why of which I couldn't unravel. Having Kerr as an enemy was one thing, but having the entirety of Synergis on our tail was unsurvivable. No, as much as I wanted to bring the women with us, to explore Izzy's knowledge and to understand Eva's importance, it simply couldn't be done. They were a risk too great. If Synergis were after them, the women needed to be sent into hiding, buried in our most secret Hada camp, away from prying eyes and far from the long tendrils of Synergis. A commotion stirred down the hall. I strained to get a better look, the electric containment shield crackling and shimmering a breath from my face. Her scent floated into the prison. Although wrong and not as I remembered, it was still a sedating cloud to my restless nerves. Closing my eyes, I inhaled a deep breath and sighed in relief. Then I opened my eyes and nearly jumped through the electrified wall. Escorted by 2 guards, Eva walked into the prison dressed in a blasted Naraki slave gown, leaving little to the imagination. They approached our cell and waited for me to step back from the shield. I stood my ground, fists clenched and feet light, ready to slaughter the guards responsible for the slight to Eva's dignity. One of the guards pressed a blaster to her head. "Step away and let her enter." "I've grown rather attached to my head," Eva said dryly. "Would you mind stepping back, big guy?" Pushing aside my anger, I obeyed her request and took 2 steps back. The shield was briefly dropped and the guards shoved Eva inside our cell with the Clued warily trotting in by her side. She stumbled into my chest and I quickly spun her behind me. The moment's delay in rushing Eva out of harm's way was enough time for the guards to reactivate the shield. The hound and I both growled at the grinning guards in frustration. Izzy snorted from the corner. Bestie? I have to admit, Naraki slave girl's a foggy hot look for you. It's smokin' hot, Izzy, and I'm glad you like it because you get one too. Eva smiled and held out a bundle of fabric. Izzy shook her head and put her hands up in rejection. Nope, yellow is absolutely not my color. Eva tossed the clothes at the little witch. Tough. Apparently it's a condition for our release. She turned to glare at Kai and me and then flicked her fingers at us. Well, don't be daft. Go block the view and keep your backs turned. Kai reclined on his bench with a grin and crossed his arms. I think it's only fair I get to watch. Izzy launched at him, but was caught midair by Eva's quick reflexes. Eva clung to the wild woman and pushed her against the wall, ducking flailing limbs and dodging kicks the whole way. Kai, let the women have their privacy, I mentally growled. No, he replied. She watched my entire life for decades. I intend to return the favor. I grabbed Kai by the collar and hauled him off the bench, dragging him to the opening of the cell and planting him in front of the containment shield. No matter what she may have done to you, she does not deserve to have the guards watch her change. I held Kai in place, forcing his head forward with a firm grasp on his neck. Thanks, big guy, Eva said quietly. There was a rustling of clothes and an abundance of curses and grumbles from the women. The guards grinned and stretched their necks to watch the show the little witch was forced to provide, which suddenly changed Kai's demeanor entirely. He shrugged off my grasp and shifted to block more of the guard's view, issuing a threatening growl of his own. I look ridiculous, the little witch whined. Join the club. At least you have pants with built-in knickers, Eva replied. I turned my head, intending to catch a quick glimpse of their progress, only to find the little witch lifting the back half of Eva's skirt, showing a long, expansive leg and a full cheek of Eva's round ass. I groaned. Gods, the woman was nearly naked. A thong? Izzy laughed hysterically. At least it wasn't your special week panties. Shut up, Eva scolded, smacking the little witch's hand to retrieve her skirts. We're done, guys. Eva planted herself on the bench next to her Clued. The little witch sat on the bench next to her friend and pouted. She flicked a bitter finger at her billowing sheer yellow pants and tugged up the strip of golden fabric that tied around her breasts, leaving her shoulders and stomach bare. Kai returned to his seat across from the little witch, twisting his lips in an attempt to control his amusement. Not a word, Taizeka! The little witch wagged her finger at Kai, then crossed her arms over her stomach with a glare. I returned to my pacing between the 2 benches lining the small space. With all 4 of us thrown into a small cell together, the overcrowded space was grating on my nerves. Make that 5 of us. Kai and myself, the 2 crazy witches, and their blasted Clued. 6 if I included the little witch's bat. After another half-hour of silence, without a single sign of our release, I stopped pacing in the only empty corner remaining. My anger over Kai's behavior, which landed all of us in this mess, continued to rise with every minute we were locked inside the king's prison. Closing my eyes, I took several deep, calming breaths. I imagined shoving my anger into a bottle and sealing it with a cork. The boiling rage would eventually blow, but at least now I could begin with a level head. Opening my eyes, I turned to face my brother. Are you going to tell me how much I've disappointed you? Kai sneered into my head. He sat on the cold metal bench staring at the small witch. The witch met his challenge, silently glaring daggers at my brother from the bench on the opposite wall. As far as I could tell, neither had broken eye contact in the last half hour. I thought he was on it, Lana, and we could end this here and now. I made a mistake, but I'd do it again to get a chance at Kerr. Kai admitted. How did you imagine your little mission would end, brother? I calmly inquired. With Kerr's death, Kai replied angrily. Ah, so you're not only self-absorbed and suicidal, you're also delusional. All of the qualities one hopes for in a second captain. I nodded in disappointment. I'm not suicidal. I thought I had the element of surprise, Kai admitted. You blindly teleported into a Naraki hunting forest alone. That is the very definition of suicidal. I shook my head and fisted my hands before they found their mark around Kai's throat. You might have had the element of surprise before you started harassing our customers and announcing to the entire sector that you were hunting him. Instead, you got us captured by the King of Atlana, and both you and Eva were injured. If Val is gracious enough to let us go, now we have a target on our backs. All of our backs. Yours, mine, the crew, Geminis. You put the entire Hada population at risk for your revenge. I turned from Kai before giving in to the temptation of violence. The hound growled, sensing the elevated tension. Eva absently caressed between the animal's ears, lulling the creature to silence. Her head rested against the hound's side, eyes closed and jaw clenched. I wasn't the only one frustrated with our circumstances. Kai let out an exasperated breath. You're being dramatic. Am I? I interrupted. Kai needed an immediate awakening to reality. You went after Kerr in Val's territory. Even if you survived, it would have brought the Naraki to the doors of Geminis. If you killed Kerr, it would have brought the Raka and Synergists to Geminis, which means we would have been fighting a battle against the armies of 3 enemies in our blasted place of business. First, you and I would never survive a battle against the thousands of Raka and Naraki stationed on Atlana. We're good, but we're not that good, especially right now. I could tell Kai wanted to argue, but he wisely kept silent. Undeterred, I continued my assault, unable to control my anger now that it had been uncorked. Second, Val has spent the last 50 years making Atlana a stable community for all species. After inciting a battle on his space station, how do you think he'd retaliate? Val would have no choice but to take control of Geminis, which he's wanted for years, and expel anyone associated with us. Kai glanced to me, finally breaking eye contact with the witch, then quickly averted his eyes. Izzy clapped and laughed. I won! Hada's rule, vampires drool. Kai's a loser, loser, loser. Kai rolled his eyes at the crazy witch. It was a mistake, Luke. I'm sorry. And what does it matter now? Kerr wasn't there. It was all a ploy by the crazy witch Agby. Which you fell for. And that's all you can say? You're sorry? I had hoped the ramifications of his actions were starting to sink in. Apparently not. Without our club funding the camps, what will happen to the millions of Hada scattered around the common? Kerr most likely knows we're alive now. He'll be expected to finish the job he started on Vihara, which means if we get out of this alive, we're forced to abandon the launch and go back into hiding. All because you wanted to kill the man who was hired for the crimes he committed. I desperately wanted to shake sense into him. He's more than a hired gun, and you know it. Kai's eyes lit red with fury, and he jumped to his feet. He's been trying to take us down since our years in the military. He killed our sister. He destroyed our people at Vihara. We could have ended this cycle here and now. At what expense? How many lives are you willing to sacrifice for your ill-planned revenge? My shout ripped through the silence of the small cell. What does it matter if the deed's finally done? Kai shouted back. My control finally snapped and I charged for my brother. A beastly snarl ripped from my lips. I heard the growls of an animal and shouts from a woman I didn't recognize. I was blinded to everything but the need to crush my brother's throat. In the back of my mind, I knew I wasn't entirely in control, but the fog of rage would no longer be denied. As my fingers finally found purchase around Kai's throat, a soft feminine oomph momentarily penetrated the fog, then disappeared as I began to squeeze the windpipe trapped between my hands. Suddenly a hard tug on my chin forced my head down, and deep brown eyes captured my gaze, obliterating the rage. "Hey, mountain man." The woman's frown lifted into a smile. "There you are. Would you mind not killing the jerk while I'm stuck in a supernatural sandwich between you two?" I blinked away the confusion and took note of our positions. My long beard was fisted in Eva's hands, wrenching my head down to look at her. I realized my hands were wrapped around Kai's throat, caging the woman between my arms where she was pinned between my body and Kai's. My brother's face was turning purple, but his eyes blazed red. I released his throat, and Kai immediately pushed at the woman between us, shoving her into my chest. I stumbled back, keeping my hold on Eva, fearing she might fall. "Don't you push my girl!" Izzy stomped her foot and wagged a finger in Kai's face. "She just saved your life, you stupid vampyre!" Kai rolled his eyes at the little witch, the red of his eyes fading back to their normal brown coloring. "I'm sorry." "Again, you're sorry? Is that it?" I could feel the rage begin to reignite. "Your actions today were a betrayal to all those we're responsible for. You betrayed our family, our crew, and you betrayed me." I felt another tug at my chin but ignored the request for attention. "What did he do now?" Izzy asked. She turned to Kai, glaring at him. "Did you screw another siren? You never could keep it in your pants when it came to them." A loud whistle crashed against my sensitive ears. I released the woman to shield my ears, my face twisting in pain. After releasing my beard, Eva reached up and pulled away my hands. "Sorry, big guy," Eva whispered. "Goodness, what are you, 7 feet tall?" Without waiting for a reply, she turned and sat next to her growling hound. "If the entire common is as crazy as you people, I highly suspect we were thrown into this tiny cage together to meet an unfortunate end. Either by each other or by Clued." She caressed the animal's head. "What do you say we not fall for that trap and stop trying to kill each other?" Izzy dropped down on the bench next to her friend and slung an arm across Eva's shoulders. "You're right, but you're spoiling all my fun." I turned my back to the room to stare out the shimmering containment field of the cell. As much as I wanted to gnash my teeth in denial, Eva was right. We couldn't afford to come apart right now, and I would be damned to Heliash before I gave Vol what he wanted. The blasted king had his sights on Geminus and expected us to play right into his trap. That was not going to happen. But I needed to put a stop to Kai's insanity immediately. If this were the kind of trouble he would find on our first trip back to the common, what amount of damage could he do in several weeks? No, this had to stop. The anger slid from my bones and I was instantly exhausted. We were not ready for this. "I've been where you are," I said and turned to face Kai. "I know this is difficult. I'm not expecting you to be who you were. You need to understand that I will love and protect you no matter who you are, even if you hate me for it. But neither of us is more important than the cause." "I made a mistake," Kai admitted. "You're right. I'm not thinking clearly. I truly am sorry, my brother. It won't happen again." "Yes, it will," I said with a sad smile. "It will happen again and again until you have destroyed everything we've worked so hard to build. You haven't had an entire childhood to prepare for these feelings, or 30 years to soften the blow of Vahara. I'm sorry you have to suffer through this, but I need more." I solemnly spoke into Kai's mind. "Tell me, how do I fix this?" he asked. I drew a heavy breath and made the demand. "I want your bonded vow not to go after Kerr. I don't care if he walks into Geminus tied up in a big bow. You will not actively pursue Kerr for revenge." Kai stilled at the request. A vow made between Raka and a bonded partner was far more than a promise. Should Kai break his vow, the bond would be instantly broken and whiplash against the one who broke it. Kai would be left in terrible pain until I voluntarily reconnected the bond. A request was a drastic measure I had been hoping to avoid. "We can't stay in hiding. If I give you my vow, will you consider a launch?" Kai asked. His reply was encouraging. "Possibly," I said. "It depends on how much damage has been done." Kai ground his teeth and expelled a pained growl worthy of a Keddy. He paced a few feet, turning his back to me, and ran shaking hands through his midnight curls. The two witches sat across the small cell, watching our faces as the silent argument played its course. Tension filled the cell as several minutes passed in silence. Then Kai slowly nodded and returned to face me. "I, Kai Tezeka, vow to you, Lucien Singh Raval, not to physically pursue Kerr for my personal revenge." The bond vibrated between us to gently settle a little heavier inside my chest. "Thank you," I whispered across the bond. It hadn't been a perfect vow, but it was enough to satisfy my need to protect all parties concerned. "Damn it, Luke!" The little witch folded her arms across her chest and pushed out her bottom lip in a pout. "You could have at least made him vow to stop sleeping with sirens while you were at it. No matter how many times he goes back, he can never seem to get it right anyway." "Izzy!" Eva scolded. "Boundaries! Wait, did you actually scry?" The little witch slammed her hand over Eva's mouth. "Ixnay on the Ibingskray. Not here. The walls have ears, you know." "And of course I did. That was the best part." Eva pulled the hand from her mouth. "Seriously? You only get half your idioms right, but you're fluent in Pig Latin? And that's just messed up, Izzy. Boundaries." "That's not the worst of it," Kai said. He sat on the opposite bench and leaned against the wall. "Try getting sex tips from a—" he motioned to the little witch. "After each of those sessions." Eva burst into laughter and held a hand high in the air. "High five," she said. Then the smaller witch smacked Eva's hand in what appeared to be a form of congratulations. "Well played, you crazy rebel girl." I turned back to stare out the containment field. They were all crazy. The clued-caressing woman of my dreams was no exception. We had been waiting for Vol for hours when the guards arrived to escort our entire group to the king's throne room. Once there, we waited another hour for the man to arrive. My patience was a whisper-thin layer of ice over a raging ocean. I had hoped to never have cause to visit the king's throne room. Between Kai's impatience and Agby's scheming, I now found myself dropped right into the gilded nest. The room was rather large for a space station, and I assumed Vol removed several partitions to accommodate such extravagance. The walls were a flat black with polished ebony stone floors and golden columns placed evenly around the edges of the room. Standing alone at the end of the long hall was a large black stone throne, marbled with veins of red and gold and flanked by two gilded clued statues. I had been shocked to find the throne didn't stand upon a dais. With all of the gold poured into the room, I'd expected Vol's ego would demand a higher station than his audience. The witches meandered around the hall, providing commentary on various redecorating solutions to the gaudy room, much to the frustration of the guards who watched the clued trail the women like a devoted puppy. Every time they drifted too close to the unknown guards, the hound would growl and snap in warning. I watched Eva in fascination as she glided past the men, oblivious as they choked on their tongues when she absently placed a hand on the animal's head and rubbed its ears in affection. How she managed to tame the walking nightmare was utterly confounding. "I find myself intrigued by this hall of mirrors you describe," a deep voice interrupted the women's discussion. I turned, surprised to see Vol casually leaning against a pillar at the far end of the room, eyes intent on Eva. "Tell me, where exactly will I find this place?" Eva's eyes grew wide and she looked to her friend for help. Izzy waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, it's in a teeny-tiny town somewhere in Matriku. We don't really remember," Izzy said in an obvious attempt to rescue Eva. I could smell the deception from across the room and suspected the Naraki could as well. "Lie," I informed Kai, "and he knows it. Keep your mouth shut and let me do the talking. Shall I hold your coat and open the hatch for you as well? Kai teased. Just shut up and let me try to fix this, I said. Val smiled and stood from his position to prowl toward the women. The king was of average height, hiding his strong build under a finely tailored black suit stylishly of Prithia fashion. His short, trimmed brown hair framed a strong, square face with intent hazel eyes instead of the typical Naraki black. He had a slightly large nose, thin lips, and a cleft chin, which I sized up for my next target. Val tugged at the sleeve of his jacket and flexed his shoulders as he approached Izzy. He gently took her hand in his and caressed her wrist with his thumb. Val smiled again. But my dear Isadora, you've never been to Matriku. Isadora? Kai's chest rumbled with a growl. I never said we actually visited the place, sir. Isadora tried to salvage her lie. Val chuckled and turned from the flustered little witch to approach Eva, stopping within a few strides of the woman. The Clued began to growl at the king. The brazen woman narrowed her eyes at Val and placed her hand atop the hound's head, caressing the animal into silence. Val threw back his head and laughed. My anger at the king's amusement was an unwelcome distraction. Eva, my uncommon beauty, why are you here? Val began to circle Eva and the Clued. He appraised every inch of her, which was an easy task considering the outfit she was wearing. Before he rounded to face her, Val gave me a sly glance. The man was scheming. Isadora tried to reply, but stopped at Val's raised finger. I did not ask you, Isadora. I asked Eva. His eyes never left Eva. Her fingers fidgeted and her brow wrinkled. It was obvious to see she was uncomfortable with the spotlight. The blatant vulnerability only made matters worse. Her features were so honest and plain to read that I wondered how she would manage to survive the common. I've never been to Prithia. Very few have, and most don't live to tell their tales, but I suspected their isolated culture was far less dangerous. Children of the common learned to mask their physical reactions as a defense tactic against the various species that would take advantage of such vulnerabilities. I forced myself to rein in the incredible need to protect her, a need that was both absurd and unnecessary considering the Clued at her side. We were trying to reach them, Eva gestured toward Kai and I. We need safe harbor and thought his people could help. You would have me believe 2 simple matri wandered into my territory looking for the beast of Baraketu and the blood prince? That's an unlikely location to find them. Yet, somehow you did, Val said. Eva wisely didn't reply to his question-turned statement. She did glance in my direction with curiosity written across her face. I slightly shook my head, hoping she understood to keep the details of our meeting secret. Agby would flay me alive if it came to Val's attention that she was part of all this. Tell me, Eva, how are you able to touch the Clued? Val took a step closer to the woman. I don't know, sir, Eva replied. Are you the one who ordered us to wear these ridiculous clothes? Kriho. The woman definitely had nerve. No one confronted the king of Atlana so blatantly, and no one insulted Naraki custom, at least not to their face. I did. I thought it best to disguise you. Val smiled and once again took her measure. It looks good on you. It's not really my style, she replied with snark. I don't know why you would think we need disguises. Val narrowed his eyes and gave the woman a tight grin. My heart clenched at the realization that he definitely knew something about the women, but he wasn't quite ready to reveal his plans. The fact that he had plans at all was not a good sign. Val took another step closer and slowly reached out to touch Eva. To my relief, she took a half step back, avoiding his hand. Her hound resumed growling at the king. I promise not to hurt you, Val softly stated. Eva calmed the hound with a touch and returned to her position. I ground my teeth to keep a growl from emerging. as Vol placed his hand against the side of her face and stroked his thumb across her cheek. The king stilled and searched her face. He took another half-step closer, their bodies nearly touching. Eva was visibly shaking but lifted her chin. I closed my eyes and flexed my jaw, shoving aside the need to react. I had to give the woman credit. She was brave, or more likely ignorant to the fact that some Naraki could kill with a touch. The rear hatch to the throne room opened and a small pale-skinned Naraki guard entered. He paused at the king's side, a data chip in his outstretched palm. Enthralled with the beautiful brunette, Vol ignored his patient guard. A ruckus from the waiting room outside drew everyone's attention except Vol's. A guard was pushed aside to reveal a familiar blonde Raka approaching the chamber's open hatch, with a squad of Synergist escort guards following. My heart dropped as I realized Kai's intel had in fact been accurate, as Kerr strode into the room wearing a neatly pressed gray escort uniform. "Kriho, do not move, brother." I sped to Kai's side and placed a refraining hand on his shoulder. I caught sight of the king leaning in to whisper in Eva's ear. "I will not allow him to take you, but you must not let him touch either of you. Follow behind me and sit at my feet. Pretend to be my slave." Vol softly ordered the woman, then stepped back and covertly stashed the guard's data chip into a pocket. "I am not overly fond of interruptions, Kurante," the king stated. He stood, feet slightly apart, hands behind his back. His gaze drifted to Kerr with an expression of unmasked disgust. "You had to force a vow. Release me," Kai demanded. "No. Let Vol handle this and stay quiet," I ordered. Kai was vibrating with urgency to destroy the blonde bastard, and I sneezed from the rancid scent of his hatred. Kerr stopped just inside the hatch to stare at us. His face was a mask of indifference, but his scent spoke to intense shock. He hadn't known we were alive. Not until that very moment. Aside from the new uniform, Kerr hadn't changed since I last saw him, crouched over my dying body with a blasted chunk of my flesh hanging from his mouth. He was tall and thin, and his shaggy blonde hair hung over narrow eyes, a crooked nose, and thin lips. He mastered a mask of arrogance and menace. Vol turned his back to Kerr and slowly walked the distance to his throne. Eva followed behind him, snatching Isidora's hand and dragging her along. Vol spun to face his audience and gracefully sat upon the stone chair. The girls sank to the floor at Vol's feet. I wanted to howl at the sight, but now was not the time to pick a fight with the king, not with a bigger threat in the room. The Clued paused at Eva's side, but focused his attention on Kerr and his men. I was beginning to like that hound. "I have orders to retrieve the females you're questioning." Kerr gestured to Isadora and Eva without a glance. "They're escaped Synergist property, and we demand their return." "We are not!" The small witch blurted the denial, then was hushed by her companion. "You demand?" Vol narrowed his eyes at the Raka. "You, a representative of a corporation that has repeatedly been denied settlement on my station, and who is currently trespassing after being denied docking privileges, demands the king of Atlana hand over 2 of my slaves?" Vol laughed. "You'll be lucky to leave this room with your head still attached." Kerr lowered his gaze in mock deference. "My apologies, sir. The Synergist Corporation respectfully requests the return of our wayward property." He raised his eyes to the king, allowing a hint of anger. "The consolation would be beneficial to our ongoing relationship with the common," he threatened. "I'm afraid you're mistaken. These women are Atlana citizens and my property," Vol stated. "With respect, sir, they are not Atlana citizens. They arrived last night by way of portal." Kerr walked to the women and gestured to the little witch. "The one who calls herself Isadora is wanted for crimes against Synergists. I'm afraid you'll need to produce undeniable evidence to your claims. Regardless, it doesn't matter when or how they arrived. They are still mine. They are my slaves, and they are Hada on Atlana. All Hada within my realm are mine to protect." Val issued a quick glance in my direction. "What does he gain from claiming the Hada?" I pondered. "Power? He rules the smallest realm in the common," Kai mentally suggested. "Atlana has been functioning at full capacity and turning away residents for years. Unless he plans to expand, he's hit his power ceiling." "Maybe he does plan to expand," Kai speculated. "Sir, her crimes are confidential," Kerr continued. "I can assure you she belongs to Synergists." Kerr began to reach for the little witch. Kai took a step in their direction but stopped as Eva pushed the woman out of Kerr's reach, jumping to her feet to stand in front of her friend. "Lay one finger on her and I'll turn you into klud kibble." Eva fisted the fur at the snarling hound's neck. "He hasn't eaten for a few hours. I'm sure you'd make a tasty treat." Just then, a flood of Naraki guards poured into the throne room. They circled Kerr's squad with blasters drawn, waiting for the command from their king. The tension in the room was nearly explosive. Kerr's squad shuffled on nervous feet, betraying their inexperience. The king's guards were typical Naraki, standing arrogantly motionless and thirsty for blood. The rest of us stood between the two forces, merely hoping not to become collateral damage. Kerr would be a fool to continue his aggressions. Between the horde of Naraki on this station and Val's position among the Common High Council, any provocation would not only be personal suicide, but would also damage his employer's position in the sector. He wasn't a stupid Raka. He had to back down. But the look on his face as he stared at Eva was anything but rational. Kerr paid the guards little attention, glancing to Eva's hand on the klud, then back to the offending woman. He inhaled deeply, drawing in her scent. The Raka's eyes flared and an evil grin curled his lips. Eva was breathtakingly bold and utterly insane. With that single challenge, she had just sealed her fate. Kerr was obsessive. He wouldn't soon forget her or her odd scent. All eyes were focused on the provocation, so I took advantage of the distraction and subtly pulled Kai back to my side and out of the impending crossfire. "Val and Eva have it under control. Back off." I tugged at Kai's sleeve. "She's going to get all of us killed," he complained. "Not with the klud at her side, and not with 24 Naraki guards surrounding them. Relax. Kerr wouldn't dare provoke Val now." I hoped. "I believe your time here has come to an end," the king proclaimed. Kerr backed away from the women but refused to take his eyes from Eva. The hound's growls grew deeper. The klud attempted to stalk his prey while Eva struggled to pull him back by the nape of his neck. Kerr's grin grew into a full smile and he gave Eva a quick wink of promise. My own chest began to rattle with a growl. "Soon," Kerr whispered to Eva, then turned to face the king. "I will return with the proof you requested." He bowed and turned to leave, but not before giving me a hard glare. The king's guard made an opening to allow Kerr and his men to exit the chamber. Val nodded, and his guards followed the escort team out of the throne room, their boots a deafening march across the cold stone floor. The hatch closed behind the tense parade, the slide of metal locks echoing through the pregnant silence that descended upon the room. I let out a breath and watched Eva similarly deflate. "How are we not dead right now?" Eva mumbled, wiping a hand across her moist brow. "That was so badass!" The little witch hugged her friend from behind. "But next time let me do the guarding," Isadora admonished, releasing her friend from the embrace. She gave Eva a teasing shove. I believe it was the hound doing the guarding, Eva wryly replied. Good doggy. She patted the Clued on the head. My apologies. I thought we would have more time before being interrupted. Val stood from his throne and gestured for us to approach. You knew he was coming and paraded us in here like bait? I asked, not hiding the anger in my voice. Yes, the king replied unrepentantly. Well, now the Princess Leia get-up makes sense, Eva grumbled, straightening her skirts to cover a thigh. I'm going to assume we aren't really your slaves? That depends on the next few minutes of negotiations, Val said with a grin. Negotiations? Eva squeaked. Vrack! Kai spat into my head. We're not leaving them here with him. We may not have a choice. Stay calm and let me handle this, I replied, angry the demon had managed to gain the upper hand. The king pulled the data chip from his pocket, then motioned for the short guard who had remained in the room. The guard retrieved the chip and placed it into a portable reader. A viz display activated behind the throne, and Val returned to his seat to watch his audience. The dark, dead forest of the confiscated Vatas terminal illuminated the wall display. A swirling black portal formed at the end of the forest in the exact location of the Vatas exit. The two witches stepped through the portal and pulled their weapons, alarmed by their new surroundings. The viz jumped forward to Isadora explaining her life on Vatas Rosana. Again, the edited viz switched scenes to the small witch explaining her friendship with Kai, how our family had started the Hada camps, and her belief that Kai had died in the massacre of Vahara. I still can't believe she escaped, said Kai. Despite her long story, I had still been reluctant to believe this little witch was the same Grey Vatas Kai had spent years visiting. Until now. The small witch expelled a shaky breath of relief. I glanced to the two women just in time to catch Eva silently mouth, "Thank you," to the king. Val gave a slight nod in return. Something the women did not want to share had obviously been edited from the viz. The footage once again skipped ahead to show a Clued jumping onto the small witch and Eva dragging the beast from her friend's body. We watched as Eva panicked to heal Isadora and keep the hound at bay. Then, to her apparent shock, Eva's hand glowed with white magic and the small witch was healed. The viz skipped ahead to Kai and I arriving on the scene, then a clip of Isadora's story, and finally to our small prison cell. When the viz ended, the room was silent for a long moment, each of us absorbing the enormity of what it meant to have the King of Atlana know everything. The little Vatas was correct. I have eyes and ears everywhere, Val said. It's not polite to eavesdrop on private conversations, Isadora scolded the king. Had I not eavesdropped, I might have given you to Synergis, he countered. Good point. In that case, well done, sir, Isadora applauded enthusiastically. You are highly unusual for a Vatas, the king accused. That's an understatement, Eva grumbled under her breath. Again, Val's attention was drawn to Eva. His heated gaze memorized her face. I was spontaneously torn between needing to beat the man into an unrecognizable pulp and throwing Eva over my shoulder to haul her away from him. What the hell is wrong with me? Judging from your tension, I would guess lust, Kai chuckled. I mentally kicked myself for the slip in thought. Shut up. I'm distracted with curiosity, not lust. Is that what you want to call it? Kai's chuckle rumbled through his chest, drawing the attention of the king. Guards, Val abruptly ordered and gestured for the 3 remaining guards to stand before him. The men walked around our party to stand before the king. Val rose from his throne and approached his men. He looked to Eva, briefly turned his eyes to me, and finally settled on his guards. Thank you for your service. A short sword dropped from Val's sleeve, and with unnatural speed for a Naraki, he swung the weapon with quick strokes. 3 heads hit the ground and rolled to the feet of their audience. The guards' bodies limply fell in encore. Blood arced from the drenched sword, splashing across the floor, the hound, and finally landing across the shocked face of the last spectator in our row. Eva. Val sighed with relief. Now, let's barter. Subscribe to continue listening and discover if our heroes are able to survive the Demon King of Atlana. If you liked what you heard, the Uncommon ebook can be purchased at all major retailers for only 99 cents. Thank you for listening.